Good evening, debaters. We're going to talk today about your value criterion. How do you achieve your value? We're going to go through this pretty quickly. The materials are also on rockspeechclass.net, and I will tell you how to find that link. What is a value criterion? In short, the shortest way to explain this is that it's a statement with a verb, and it has to have a verb, and it has to start with a verb. That's pretty much it. But it is the method for the judge to decide if your value is better than your opponent's value. Now, if you both have the same value, then the value criterion becomes the most important part of the speech because that's the thing that they have to judge between the two of you. How does it work? You have to show that your value can be achieved by doing the action in your statement better than your opponent can achieve his value by doing the action in his statement. This is called the framework. Your value and your value criterion together are called the framework, and the two must work together and complement each other. Your job is to show how they work together. That's the number one important thing you have to do in your speech. Essentially, we have this concept that this is an idea and this is how we achieve it. The idea is justice, and we achieve it by compelling participation in our government. The idea is democracy, and the best way to get it is to require voter participation. Those are two things that here's an idea, here's how we achieve it. Now, in debate language, we say the value is justice, and we achieve it by compelling participation in our government. Or the value is democracy, and the best way to get it is to require voter participation. That's the value and the value criterion together. What's critical is that you explain the connection, the link between your value and your value criterion. This doesn't have to be tremendously involved. It needs to be as involved as you choose to make it. Now, a lot of what's going to be explaining your link may be your contentions, but you need to be able to explain this so the judge can understand. Contentions. Contentions are the arguments that you're putting forth to support your value and your value criterion, your framework. Contentions have four parts: a statement, the evidence, the warrant, and the impact. A great contention has all four of these, and if you have all four, you almost cannot lose. A statement essentially is a summary that presents your idea to the judge. Be precise and very easy to understand. Compulsory voting overcomes absenteeism. Pretty simple. Evidence is the factual information that supports your claim, your statement. Now, sources for evidence are everywhere, and you need to learn to understand what are good sources as opposed to what are bad sources. There are some sources that are politically suspect, especially in a topic such as ours, which is a political voting issue. So you don't want to necessarily go with something that your opponent can say that's a bias, that's not a valid source. So you want to go with authoritative sources, and those would be certain newspapers, certain publications in the political world, and certain experts. Now, when you look at an expert, many times in the political realm, you're talking about a college professor or some kind of college publication. That needs to be examined very closely before you decide to take it seriously. There are a lot of colleges out there that have reputations for being biased in one direction or another. Every bit of information you collect is called a card. And what that comes from the idea that we used to copy things out of newspapers, magazines, or whatever the source was, and we would tape it onto an index card. Well, nobody does that anymore, but the naming has remained the same. Usually, when a card is presented as evidence, or the evidence from the information is presented, it is given a name. Now, sometimes it's the name of the publication, such as the Washington Post. Sometimes it's the name of the writer. Sometimes it's it's a title of the article. Whatever it is, you need to be consistent in how you use it throughout the entire presentation. Don't call it the Washington Post article first and then refer to it later on as the piece by Joe Schmo, because that's not fair and it doesn't really help your case. Make sure that you're using your sources consistently as well. Now, in this topic, you're going to find a lot of sources that are going to talk about both sides of the issue. Should there be compulsory voting? Shouldn't there be? So when you are looking at what your source is, you need to make sure that what you're citing actually supports what you say it does. That's a very important point, because sometimes things don't support what you think they do. Have you ever heard the word warrant, like a warrant for arrest or arrest warrant? A warrant is the explanation of why the information proves the claim. Now, an arrest warrant is an explanation to the judge that says this is why this person should be arrested. In our case, the warrant shows why we've made this claim. And that's really important, because when you put that information in front of somebody, they don't necessarily make the connection for you. You have to make it for them. Now, in particular, warrants demonstrate benefits and harms to your claim. Now, let's talk about benefits. Let's say that we're talking about the benefits to a person or the benefits to a group. That means it's something that is good for them. Okay, we're not talking about insurance here. We're talking about making their lives, their liberty, or their property better. The opposite of that are called harms. The opposite means these are things that hurt this person, in particular with their natural rights of life, liberty, and property. But it might harm them in other ways. So you need to be specific. Now, balancing benefits and harms doesn't have to be tricky, but it does need to be used very clearly. So you're talking about this clear benefit and this clear harm. Sometimes people get confused when they're doing this. What you can do, and what you ought to think about, is when you've got a benefit, think about the harm that might balance it, and try to present your benefit in such a way that you take out the harm argument right from the get-go. Here's an example of a warrant, the part in the blue at the bottom of the page. When the government has better approval of the citizens, it is less likely to have internal political struggles, which benefits the citizens' welfare. That's a really good benefit. Now, the harm might be, if the government has better approval of the citizens, it might be more likely to do things that are harmful to minority members. See, you got to have a balance there. You got to figure out how you're going to answer this. Finally, the impact. These are the results of your claims. What happens if your claim is true? Now, evidence of your impact almost always wins. Rarely have I not given that the win. Now, people can make claims and say there's a certain evidence, or there's a certain impact. But if you don't have evidence of it happening, if it's theoretical, it's less valuable to you. Now, if we're talking about a theoretical argument, you don't necessarily have evidence. But if you've got some, you should be putting it in and citing your evidence appropriately. Now here, the impact of this is that the stabilized government leads to better treatment of the citizens' human rights. Now, that's a really good impact, and you should probably try to make sure you say the words, the impact of this, or this impacts, something along those lines. Use the word impact, because that catches the judge's ear. Link back to your framework. Now, every contention needs to have a link back to the value criterion and to the value. It should be the last part of the contention that you say. In this one, by reducing absenteeism, we see that compulsory voting increases the participation of the citizens of the government, which upholds my value of democracy. Now, there you go. I've got all the links back to my value criterion and my value. And then I could move on to my next contention. An affirmative constructive has 6 minutes, and the negative constructive has 7 minutes. So it sounds like the negative constructive has an advantage, but no, they do not. The negative constructive actually has 7 minutes, but during that time, it has to lay out its own constructive arguments and attack all of the F's contentions and framework. That's a lot of stuff to put together in a very short period of time. They have longer, but they have more work to do. How are they going to manage this? Well, the NC has a few little tricks to manage their time. First of all, AF must argue the resolution. Now, however they define the words of the resolution, they still have to argue it. Neg can go everywhere else as long as it's staying resolutional. If we're talking about voting rights and suddenly neg wants to start talking about giving cats the right to vote, well, that's not really anything related to democracy because we don't have a social contract with cats. Cats can't be compelled to do anything, especially not vote. Therefore, this is not resolutional. But neg can vote or neg can run anything they want as long as they can relate it back to the resolution and the judge doesn't think they're crazy. Now here's a time hack for neg. If you're both using the same value, then just recognize that and don't debate it. Just move on. Af and I agreed on the value of justice as defined to each his due. Moving on to my value criterion cuts out all of the stuff you don't need to address again. Move on quickly. The time constraints are serious. Use your case to attack the AF if you can. Now, if you're both talking about one particular country and the results of compulsory voting there, and AF says that it was beneficial, yada, 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 and you've got the same country in your neg talking about harms to the citizens, then specifically mention in AF's contention 1, she talked about this country and this benefit. But Judge, I have evidence that shows in my contention 2 that that there are absolute harms and the benefits are not outweighed by the harms. So use your own case strongly. Tie up your framework quickly. If you can do it in one sentence when you're neg, that's really good because, again, you've got the very limits of time. Now, signposting is to tell the judge before the timer starts what it is you're going to do. Am I going to attack first and move to my own case? Am I going to present my own case and then attack AF? It doesn't matter which you do as long as you tell people. Also, in the middle, when you switch from your case to attacking AF, you need to say that right there in the middle. Now, moving on to AF's case is a really nice way to be, it's a courtesy to everybody who is in the debate because we all have to now flip over to other flow page so we're getting everything down where it needs to be. This is the value criterion portion. We will next go on to other things that I can't remember what I'm doing next. Sounds like it's late. I hope you guys are having a good day. See you later.